Hi, I'm Joe Feeks, editor of Poultry Health Today, and with me is Dr. Dan McChesney. He is the Director of Office of Surveillance and Compliance for FDA's Center of Veterinary Medicine. Dan, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
The poultry industry has been very good about following the rules, particularly as it applies to feed medications and other antibiotics. And so they've got a good track record, but we have this new thing coming along now. At least it's new to the poultry industry, called the Veterinary Feed Directive. Just to get everybody in our audience on the same page, what exactly is the Veterinary Feed Directive, or VFD, and what is really FDA trying to accomplish with this?
Well, there's a couple things, Joe. The Veterinary Feed Directive has been around for a number of years, but it's been limited to a few drugs, really none that I'm aware of in the poultry industry. And it really involves having a veterinarian involved in the use of the drug. And as we move forward and our concerns have increased about antibiotic use, we're in the process of moving a number of drugs to VFD status, so we'll have a veterinarian involved in the use of those products with the animals. Right now, most of those products are over the counter, so there could be veterinary involvement, but there doesn't necessarily have to be. And we're looking to get more veterinary involvement in this. And that's really what the VFD is. There's that record-keeping requirements, but the main thing is the veterinarian being directly involved in the administration or the decision to use drugs in an animal.
But it doesn't apply to all feed medications, is that correct?
It applies mainly to antibiotics of human medical importance, although there are others caught up. And in that, if you go to the FDA webpage and you go to the section for veterinary medicine and you go under judicious use, we've actually just published 2 one-pagers that list the drugs that are transferring, both by their chemical name, but also by their common name that either is from the sponsor or distributor. So veterinarians and feed mills and those interested will have a ready reference that they won't have to search for.
Now, in order to generate a VFD, there has to be what's known as a veterinarian-client-patient relationship. I know that there's a 5-point definition on your website and AVMAs and so forth. We're not going to cover all of that here, but how does that really apply to the poultry industry, that definition?
Well, the crux of the definition is that a veterinarian has to have knowledge of the animals and see the animals and be available for their care. It's liberal in the sense that there aren't a lot of specifics, because we realize that the care of animals involves not only a veterinarian, but nutritionist and maybe animal biologist, depending on the species. And so there is some flexibility in the poultry industry, which is highly concentrated, and you can have a veterinarian being responsible for literally hundreds of thousands of animals, that the expectation that that veterinarian would physically touch every animal is obviously unrealistic. But we do expect the veterinarian to have sufficient knowledge of the flock or the house or the herd that's being treated to say, this is why I'm treating the animal, what I'm prescribing, what I'm writing the VFD for is likely to work for the animal, and have his involvement in that. Now, admittedly, he probably can't be in all one place, but you can surely rely on other folks to say, I ordered this treatment, did it work? And so that's really the crux of it, that putting the decision of what to use, whether an animal needs a drug, and what drugs should be used, putting that back in the hands of the veterinarian, where in the past it could be the producer or the grower, or literally anyone could go buy these over the counter and say, well, I think this is what's wrong with my birds, so I'm going to treat them with X because my friend down the road said he had something similar. And that's what we're trying to do away with. We're trying to get more veterinary involvement, especially with the use of antibiotics, so we get a better, more appropriate use of those products.
Now, on one hand, it seems like the VFD would be even easier to implement in the poultry industry because it is so highly integrated. In some cases, you've got the veterinarian, the feed mill, and the producer all on the same payroll. But at the same time, the poultry industry is enormous. You might have a situation where the veterinarian is in Mississippi and the producer's in Georgia, and the feed mill might even be in another state. How does that come together?
Well, what we've looked at the definition for the veterinary client-patient relationship, and we've modified it slightly to really put it back on the states, because the states are the ones who license veterinarians to practice. And we've tweaked the definition a little bit, and we've reviewed all the states that have similar definitions, and we've actually posted a list of those states that meet the federal definition that are equal or greater than the federal definition. So in those states, it's really the practice of veterinary medicine would determine what a veterinarian could do. Could the veterinarian practice across state lines? What's the relation of the feed mill to that? So that's really would be in state practice. So whether a person who's licensed in Georgia could practice across the South Carolina line would depend on the state laws. We wouldn't look at that. We do want to make sure the veterinarian's involved in the process, and we are currently deferring to the states for the practice of veterinary medicine and the enforcement of the veterinary client-patient relationship, provided it meets the same level of as the federal one, which most states do.
Let's talk about extra label usage. As I was saying to you before the interview, I've read some articles have said that there will be no extra label after the VFD kicks in next January 1st. Others have said that there's no extra label now. What exactly is the situation as it relates to poultry right now?
Well, extra label use has always been allowed since Amduca in some form or another. So the basic tenets of it are that you have to use an approved animal drug or an approved human drug. For food-producing animals, you have to use the animal drug first as opposed to a human drug. You have to have a veterinarian involved in it. The veterinarian would have to determine in a food animal what's the withdrawal period in case there's a potential for a residue. All that is still valid under the VFD. I think as we talked before, what changes is we've actually taken some of the tenets from what was in the extra label use, the veterinary involvement, giving that person more responsibility, and apply that to the VFD. So in the sense, a lot of things that were required before for extra label use are now being required for VFD. So maybe someone's interpretation of that would say there's no extra label use, but in fact there are, because there are cases where a veterinarian may have used a product, no, it doesn't work in these animals, and needs to use something in an extra label manner, which he can still do.
And practically speaking, when a veterinarian issues a veterinary feed directive, it's good for how many months?
Well, it's one of these. The answer is it depends, Joe. There are limitations on the medication itself. They may be limited for 2 weeks or something. So if that's the case, then you could write the VFD for that. If there isn't one, you can write it for up to 6 months. But you can't write multiple. You can't write multiple ones. You can't say, well, it's 2 weeks. It says on the label to treat for 2 weeks. The veterinarian, think you need to be treated for 6 weeks, so I'm basically giving you refills. You can't do that. That's not allowed unless refills are permitted, which there aren't any currently.
So maybe that answers my next question, because I was going to say that, broilers might be on the floor for anywhere from 45 to 65 days. Right. Can a veterinarian write a VFD for 6 months to cover multiple flocks just in case that disease comes up again?
No, the answer is he can't write for multiple flocks. He would have to see those or have some knowledge that flock was going to have the same issue. And you can only write it for what's the time of the maximum duration of what it's allowed. And you can't write, if you wanted to treat for multiple weeks, you would just have to re-see the animals, or basically reevaluate the animals and say, yes, we treated, we had 10 houses, we treated them, it looks like it's going pretty well, but I think they need to be treated again for 2 weeks. And their professional judgment, additional treatment is needed. He could write a VFD for the additional treatment.
And for the poultry industry, how specific does that location need to be on the veterinary feed directive? Is it identifying which 10 houses or can you simply say a specific farm? How does that work?
You have to be able to find the animal. So I think, depending on how things are laid out, you could probably say a farm. Now, if it was 100 houses on the farm, you'd probably need to say, these are the 10 I want to treat or the 50 I want to treat. But in general, it could be someone who reads it. If we were to go to a feed mill and say, feed mill fill this VFD for such and such a farm, we need to be able to find that, whatever that is. I mean, it could be an address, it could be a GPS location. I mean, we're moving more towards that now.
Now let's get back to your area, compliance and surveillance. How do you go about ensuring compliance with this new VFD?
Well, I think we're obviously going to have to do a lot of education of what's required on the VFD rules. As we've said, there's been a segment of the industry that's had VFD for a long time in the swine, some of the cattle industry, but not in the poultry industry. So we have some core veterinarians that are familiar, but largely most of them aren't. So there's a big education piece to that, and we'll be looking to do that. The other thing now that's coming out, because we're seeing many more drugs be VFDs than the handful of current are there are at least, I believe, 4 companies that have come in and talked with FDA about electronic VFD records. So the veterinarian will usually sign up with a service through a drug company or this thing, or these providers, and when they want to write it, they'll be able to do it completely electronically. So the VFD form will come down, it'll give the indications, so it'll take a lot of the potential for mistakes out of it. So I think that's a good thing, not pushing any of these, but saying that, in ways of making life easier for someone, those are good. So that's one thing, and we want to see the veterinarians involved in it. We'd like to see animal health stay as healthy as they are now, not go down. We'd like to see better use of antibiotics, and along those lines, we're seeing, we currently get sales data from companies. In a short amount of time, we'll be getting estimates of usage data, so we'll be able to see if usage goes up or down. And we're looking at something that you and I had talked about earlier, something called biomass, where we try to normalize across all the animal population, because even if everyone's complying with everything that's required under the VFD under 213, it's still possible to see growth in antibiotic use, either because animals have become sick, or we have more animals that we're giving drugs to. And so biomass is a way that we could normalize that and look at trends across time to say, and that will allow us to say, take into account if there are increase in animals or decrease in animals, to put that with the usage data. So I think that's going forward, that's a lot of things, and we're looking into doing that now at FDA. We're doing some modeling with that, and there are other folks doing it also.
And just to be clear, when you talk about biomass, with respect to the poultry industry, are you talking about measuring like the amount of antibiotic per ton or a metric ton of chicken produced, or how does that work? We would look at, there are several ways it can work. We're kind of looking at this, but we're looking at, we would take sales data that we get. Admittedly, there's some, variance around that. We would look at the estimate from species data we get, what percentage of sales go to that. Then we'd look at USDA data for how many layers are there, how many broilers are there. And then we would do a calculation of biomass based on simplistically saying, if you've got, how many chickens does it take to make one cow? And so we could normalize this, and we could look at, well, if there's a big increase in chicken population, what has that done to the use? And, if we see a 10% increase in chicken population, we would expect to see some overall use right now we can't do that, because we just have this, here's how much antibiotic was sold, this big, huge number that's hard to put any quality around. And then when we get species data, we'll have some more, we'll be able to do that. So I think that's being done in Europe now, and I think it's a really good way to look at trends over time and to refine it over time. And I think ultimately we'd like to see, can we, is use of antibiotics related to resistance? If it is, how is it related?
Is it again with some serotypes is it related and not others? Just to try to better understand it. And right now, the data we have is so high level that we're trying to get more and more granular data to better understand this and be able to refine what we're doing and inform the veterinarian, the public, everyone.
Now, Dan, you were talking about biomass. One statistic that you always hear on TV, read in the newspapers, is that 80% of the antibiotics used in the United States are going into food animals. But I've heard that number can be a little twisted. What's your take on it from FDA's perspective?
Well, I think the number is probably true. I mean, people say we publish the number of how much antibiotics are used in animals. The similar numbers are published for humans, and that's just sort of a mathematical equation. I think what it leaves out, though, is the context and the fact that, on the human side, we're treating a U.S. population of 350 million or something, whatever the population is. On the animal side, we're potentially treating, 150 million cattle, probably a similar number of swine, and we're treating 8 or 9 billion chickens potentially. So that to me is why biomass is so important, because then we get something about what's the uses per animal. And so while 80% I think is a true number and a very big number, it's also using it's involved in the health of literally billions of animals. Mm-hmm. And so I think it just needs context. And we talked a little bit about biomass. I think that's why biomass is important. It's important to refine the sales data, the species data, any other data we can get to get those numbers, so we can really get a good whole picture. So when we talk about this, we can talk so everyone understands what we're doing, and we can measure trends, whether they're going up or down. But as it stands now, we have so little granularity in the data. We just get, it's a big number, and everybody agrees, yes, it's a big number, but there's a lot of animals. So I think we're looking to refine that number, and in a way that we can have really productive discussions with, across the animal health industry, the human health industry, with consumers, with everyone.
Okay, well, we've been talking to Dr. Dan McChesney. He is the Director of Office of Surveillance and Compliance for the FDA Center of Veterinary Medicine. Dan, thank you once again.
Thanks, Joe. It was a pleasure.
Likewise.